We need that middle ground that we call the middle class, the people who buy everything.
50 years of silence, the price Morgan Freeman paid for the voice the world trusted. Close your eyes for a moment and think about the voice. You know the one. Deep, measured, unhurried. A voice that makes you lean in even when it's saying something simple. A voice that makes the ordinary sound profound and the extraordinary sound inevitable. For decades, that voice has narrated documentaries, guided films, embodied wisdom, and made audiences around the world feel, instinctively and immediately, that they were in safe hands. That voice belongs to Morgan Freeman. And here's what makes his story unlike almost any other in the history of entertainment. That voice spent 50 years being ignored. 50 years of brutal, grinding, demoralizing rejection before the world finally stopped and listened. 50 years of poverty, near surrender, odd jobs, empty audition rooms, and a quiet fury at an industry that kept looking past one of the greatest talents it would ever encounter. And when success finally arrived, when the recognition came, when the statue was finally placed in his hands, it came wrapped in losses so devastating that even his legendary voice could not narrate them without breaking. This is not a simple success story. This is something much harder and much more honest than that. This is the story of what it actually costs a human being to wait half a century for the world to catch up to what they always were. It is a story that begins not in Hollywood but in the cotton fields and segregated backroads of the American Deep South. In a world that had already decided, before this child ever spoke a single word, exactly how much his life was worth. Morgan Freeman was born in June of 1937 in Memphis, Tennessee. But the landscape that shaped him was Mississippi. Small, rural, poor, and operating under a system of laws and social rules designed specifically to crush any ambition that rose above the station assigned to Black Americans by white authority. Jim Crow was not just policy. It was atmosphere. It was the way a store clerk looked through you, the way a police officer spoke to you, the way every institution, from the school building to the water fountain, communicated the same message in different forms: your life matters less. His father was a barber fighting an economy built to deny him. His mother worked as both teacher and cleaner, taking whatever work she could find. Even two incomes were not enough. When Morgan was still an infant, his parents made one of the most painful decisions poverty forces on families. They sent him to live with his grandmother in a town so small and so stripped of resources that deprivation was simply the shared condition of everyone around him. His grandmother's home had no electricity, no running water, nothing extra of any kind. He picked cotton as a boy. He wore clothes stitched from flour sacks. He walked miles to a crumbling school building with outdated books while white children rode buses to funded classrooms. Years later, he would describe his childhood with a kind of dark precision that only someone who actually lived it could manage. They were so poor, he said, that they didn't even know they were poor because everyone around them lived exactly the same way. That is not a charming anecdote. That is the description of a system working exactly as intended. What racism gave him, alongside the poverty and the limitation and the constant awareness of danger, was invisibility. He learned early to keep his head down, to make himself small, to move through the world in a way that did not provoke the kind of attention that could turn violent without warning. He learned to survive by disappearing. And he was good at it. Until the day he wasn't. He was 9 years old when his teacher cast him in a school play. The stage was makeshift. The audience was small. Just parents and teachers crowded into whatever space the school had available. But the moment Morgan Freeman stepped into that light and opened his mouth and felt the attention of the room focus on him completely, something shifted. He was not invisible. He was not poor. He was not just another child the system had already dismissed. He was present. He was seen. He mattered. The applause at the end was not impressive by any objective measure. But for a boy who had spent his entire life being taught to disappear, it was a revelation that never fully left him. His family moved constantly. Mississippi to Chicago to Indiana and back, chasing whatever work existed and rarely finding enough of it. Stability was simply not available to them. Morgan attended school after school, always the new kid, always on the outside edge of whatever social world had already formed. At every stop, he found the drama department and threw himself into it. He memorized lines. He studied characters. He imagined, in vivid and specific detail, a life that looked nothing like the one currently available to him. His drama teacher saw it, pulled him aside, told him something that planted itself deep. You have a gift. Don't waste it. It was the first time anyone had told him he was capable of something beyond mere survival. When he graduated high school in 1955, Hollywood was not a realistic destination for a young black man from Mississippi, The roles available to black actors in American film and television at that time were largely servants, criminals, and nameless background figures. Parts that required a face, not a performance. Sidney Poitier was only just beginning to crack a door open that the entire industry kept sealed for decades. So Morgan did what many young men of his era did when the future felt impossible. He joined the military. Not out of love of country, though he served. Out of necessity. A paycheck. A structure. A way out of Mississippi that didn't require anyone to believe in him yet. He trained as a radar technician and spent his service years learning something that would reshape everything that followed. He hated it. Every day inside someone else's hierarchy, following orders, living according to someone else's design. It suffocated him. Acting was the only thing that had ever felt like freedom. And if he didn't go after it the moment he got out, he never would. In 1959, at 22 years old, he arrived in Los Angeles with a duffel bag and almost nothing else and walked directly into a wall. The city was beautiful. The industry was closed. Casting directors took one look and offered the same handful of demeaning roles. Bellhop, janitor, background filler. Parts that required no name and no skill. Just a presence in the frame. He lasted less than 2 years before the rejection accumulated beyond what he could sustain there. So he pivoted. New York. Theater. The one corner of American performance where black actors had at least a narrow opening. New York was brutal in a different way. Rent consumed everything he earned. Auditions were ruthless competitions where hundreds of people fought for a single small part, and still the same limited roles waited at the end of every process. Servants, enslaved people, extras. He later admitted that he spent years being invisible on stage just as he had been invisible in Mississippi. The difference was that in Mississippi the invisibility was forced on him. In New York, he was choosing to stay in a world that kept refusing to see him. And somehow that felt worse. To eat, to pay rent, to stay alive in the city while continuing to chase the impossible, he took whatever work existed alongside the auditions. He danced in a performance at a major world exposition. He worked as a file clerk. He drove a taxi through Manhattan traffic, running mental rehearsals of monologues between fairs. Keeping the instrument tuned even when no one was asking to hear it play. Years passed. He turned 25, then 30. Friends from his acting classes surrendered and went home. Others found stable lives and let the dream go. Morgan kept going. But the weight of it was real. He married. He became a father figure to 4 children. He had mouths to feed and a career that existed almost entirely in his imagination. Continuing to pursue, acting stopped being just a personal passion and started being, by certain measures, irresponsible. He bounced between off-Broadway productions, regional theater, experimental shows that paid almost nothing and attracted almost nobody. Then in 1967, a real Broadway production. A celebrated all-black staging of a classic musical, starring one of the great performers of that era. It was not a lead role. But it was Broadway. It was legitimate. Night after night he performed, studied, absorbed, watched how the show's star commanded attention without force or volume. She didn't need to shout to be heard, he would recall later. That's when I understood that sometimes the quietest voice carries the furthest. He was learning. But the decade was turning, and he was pushing 40, and still had almost nothing to show the world for 30 years of effort. If this story is reaching something in you, if you recognize in Morgan Freeman's long, punishing weight something of your own patience being tested, your own faith in a pursuit that keeps refusing to reward you, please share this. Because what happens next is the part that most people know only in broad strokes. And the full picture is far more powerful than the headlines ever captured. The 1970s brought a lifeline that came dressed as a compromise. A children's educational television show offered him regular work. Steady pay, national exposure, and a character that made reading feel exciting to a generation of young viewers. He was grateful. He was also quietly desperate. He was 40 years old, beloved by kindergartners, and invisible to the film industry he had spent his entire adult life trying to enter. 2 decades had passed since he arrived in Los Angeles with a duffel bag and a dream. 2 decades of survival, sacrifice, near surrender, and stubborn persistence. And still Hollywood had not called. So he went back to the stage. Not in defeat, but in decision.